Do I put off the vibes of a 85-year-old woman?
No? Why do you ask that?
Because my name caters to people when they're looking at my official identification. There's a lot of folks who see Rose Lincoln and assume that I'm hanging out with my best friend Ethel and Vivian. And it's a nightmare when I'm trying to get access to restricted areas, but I am on the list. But sometimes it's hard to find my name on that list. So if I pull up to a loading dock or a parking garage, getting ready for a broadcast somewhere, first thing I'll say is Rose, because I think surely this person's wired to find me alphabetically in a list, and me telling them Lincoln's just going to confuse them. But surely they know I'm not Rose, first name Rose, but that would be a last name.
Right.
Sometimes I'll even spell it out for them, which probably comes across as insulting. But
I mean, it is
it
four
never
letters.
it never disappoints, the song and dance I go through. And then they'll get on a walkie-talkie and relay it to the person in charge because they don't see me on the list. Now, surely if they would hand me the list, I could point to where my name is on the list. But this has been my life. The producer sometimes will ask if it's my real name, and I go, "Yeah, I'm not important enough to have come up with a stage name of Lincoln Rose." I do appreciate my parents giving me a unique name, whereas as an elementary school kid, I didn't have to put my full name. If I just put Lincoln, I knew that was going to suffice. But
Right.
the hardest thing about my job right now as a broadcaster is getting access to simply where I'm supposed to show up for work. Chicken and the egg debate has not been solved. It's I need to get a parking pass to go get a credential, but I can't get the parking pass without showing my credential. And so it's just a constant negotiation with individuals trying to explain who I am without coming across as someone with a highly inflated ego of, don't you know who I am?
You're Rose Lincoln, a golden girl.
Emergency podcast. Verde did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hurry up, shut up, hurry up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. And the emergency this week clearly is the season is over. We have moved into the off season. Some of you do not enjoy the off season, as I have been learning from the survey that we have been doing of Austin fans from the MLS end of year survey. You can still take that through November 17th, by the way. That's a plug. Joining us back, it's Lincoln Rose, or Rose Lincoln, if you prefer. How are you doing, and how is your current scene? You are sitting in the green room. Can we say this? Can we say where you're at?
Yeah, well, you would think Verde all day. Where else should I be but a green room? But I don't see a lot of green in here yet. When you and I are recording this, I'm in the midst of a stretch of three top 25 women's basketball games combined
Mhm.
with the Big 12 soccer championship. So I'm up and down I-35 for the next few days. But right now I'm at Moody Center, about in between chatting with coaches during their practices.
Okay, so this is where artists hang out before they perform, right? So most recent show I saw there was Wu-Tang Clan and Run the Jewels. So they were where you were. So that
So much
is
in common. So much
yes,
in common.
exactly. So sometimes I'm sure you get mistaken for the third member of Run the Jewels.
Yes,
Yes.
that again, when it's not being confused with an 85-year-old geriatric female, then yes, it is one of these many talented world-class musicians.
One or the other. Okay, well we gotta talk a little bit about the LAFC series, because that is what we've just come off. We're not gonna talk a lot about that because you all know what happened, but just kind of the differences between the first and second game I thought were pretty stark. I thought the first game, Austin did a pretty decent job controlling LAFC for the most part. They didn't necessarily do it in that 79th minute where it came to bite them. Of course, the Nathan Rardaz goal, which did not get the assist credited to Denny Bouanga. I think that probably should have happened, but indeed that did not. But second game, we saw a whole lot of sun in Bouanga. So wondering, what was it like to call that? I was in the press box, so I didn't get to hear the dulcet tones of Lincoln Rose as you called that game, but I'm just wondering kind of how it was emotionally to see those goals happening, and how do you convey that? Like, what's the balance? I mean, there's certainly exciting moments on the field, but they are not particularly heartening moments to Austin FC fans, and we had four of those in that match.
Yeah, I think most folks who do listen for whatever reason they're not in Austin, they can't be at Q2, or maybe for whatever reason too many of their friends are disrespectful and get married on Saturdays during MLS season. But you know, I would lack self-awareness if I said I'm never a homer on my calls. I certainly have more knowledge about Austin FC. I certainly convey an interest in Austin FC, succeeding each and every night. And certainly I get to spit out more highlights on social media if Austin has succeeded that night. But at the same time, with all the different sports I've covered throughout my career and all the athletes and coaches I interact with, I realize there's humans with interesting stories on both sides. So I try to convey stories as much about the visiting opponent throughout our broadcasts as I would think just about any other broadcast. I know sometimes when I'll go back and listen to an Apple broadcast, sometimes it is strictly play-by-play and you don't actually hear some of the stories behind some players. And I think it was last year I even asked some of our supporters in Austin, when you tune into a game, do you want to hear about the other team? Because I do feel like, and it's the same with any kind of learning experience here in the United States. Some people do want to learn about those who have experiences different from themselves, and others, if you're not talking about them, they assume that you are somehow putting them down by promoting other storylines that aren't about them. So when I see an LAFC, a Sun and Bawanga, I think when you asked me the last time we were together, looking ahead at the series, what my thoughts were, I just summed it up as yikes, because we knew the potential. This is a team that is the greatest 3 seed of all time in terms of they were on a 6-match win streak heading into the postseason. The exception is, a hiccup against Austin, and Austin very much deserved to have the win that day. Both teams were missing 2 DPs. I know most folks would just focus on LAFC missing their 2 DPs, but we're mindful Austin's been without Brandon Vasquez, and that night was without Myrto as well. But yeah, no, when LAFC managed to find those first couple of goals, you realized it was going to be a tough battle based on how Austin is structured and built, and the inherent advantages LAFC has to close out a match when you can bring in a Jeremy Ebobisse late and do what Jeremy does. So it was certainly a possibility. I think most supporters realized that could be the final night, that it could be out in 2, but it's not so much because Austin FC was not a good team. It was very much because what they were up against is going to be a tough out for any team for the rest of this postseason.
And obviously a lot of Sun fans were out in force. Maybe more, they were more Sun fans than LAFC fans per se. It kind of seemed like.
I think we saw more South Korean flags that night in that corner during a Sun corner kick in the northeast corner than we've seen Argentine flags or any other country throughout the entirety of the 5 years of Q2 Stadium. Again, when Austin hosted LAFC last month before the postseason, there were several Sun shirts of kids, and I was hoping their parents had broken the news to them that Sun would not be there that day because it'd be a heartbreaker. But they certainly showed up in full force to get a chance to see Sun in person. You're happy for them that they got to experience that. But yeah, it certainly added to the atmosphere.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of see kids with Sun jerseys and then dads with dad jerseys with also a number 7, but I don't think that happened. I didn't say that at all.
We're wired similarly. I was I hit the under on Sun puns during the broadcasts of those 2 matches.
Yeah. I mean, there was a sign in the North End that said it's Sunday, Sonday, which again, Sundays had kind of been Austin's thing. They had done well in Sunday games this season, and that did not come to pass in the Sunday match that counted. So any kind of final thoughts about just that series and that wrapping up? I mean, I did kind of in a way expect that was only going to go 2 games. I was hopeful it was going to be a third. Once Bukari was out of the lineup for game 2, I kind of felt at that point, okay, this is going to be quite the hurdle because there's only 1 designated player on the field for Austin. There are 2 for LAFC. Of course, they are only rolling with 2 DPs. If you have those 2 DPs, you're fine. I think you probably don't need a third, but certainly, pretty talented roster up and down. So just did that surprise you at all? And just what's your thoughts on just kind of what you saw in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think from the outside folks who were just casually scoreboard watching, not surprised. LAFC takes it in 2. I think if you watch the individual matches, the match at LA, you have 2 goals that by a matter of inches are correctly ruled goals. But how easily could Hollingshead have been offside? How easily could Ordaz have been narrowly offside? And instead, it's Austin with another 1-0 victory on the heels of that John Gallagher strike with again, a fantastic assist from Owen in that one. But then the second match, it's not so much a matter of inches, but the build up to that first goal, Mikel Dessler goes down, and how easily would it have been to halt play right there? Or as we've seen against Austin at times, I think it was RSL last year, where a goal is negated because of the foul in the build up. VAR sends it back, and all of a sudden it's a different match. So in a game of inches, there are certain teams that if they regularly show you, just like in this sport especially, you see 1-0 decisions regularly. But if there's one team that is more often than not winning those 1-0 decisions, if they're more often than not getting the ball to bounce their way, there's a reason for it. It's one of the better teams. And so in this case, we saw a series where it could have gone Austin's way. If you played it several times, Austin could claim 2 out of the 3, but more often than not, that's an LAFC team with the added depth, the added bonus of, again, the deeper roster, just like Miami and Seattle, because of the Club World Cup, that a lot of things are stacked against you. So again, there's reason to believe Austin could pull it out and certainly push it to LAFC's backyard for one more match. But in the end, not too surprising overall big picture. But the difference is, nationally speaking, they would assume a 2-0 blanking for LAFC for a different reason than people who actually watched Austin FC play this year, ultimately why it unfolded the way it did.
Yep, for sure. And then we have 3 series now of the 8 in the first round that are decided. 5 of those will get decided this weekend, starting with, well, by the time you were listening to this on Saturday morning, the Charlotte NYCFC match will already have happened. And that's a match that happened because Charlotte did outlast NYCFC in penalties in Yankee Stadium. And that was, of course, Cristian Kalina, who made some big saves during that match in the closing moments where NYC was trying to get the first and only goal of the game, and instead it went to I believe 8-7 PK sequence. So they went pretty far deep into their numbers to get that. 7-6 rather, but I believe it went 8 players deep. So that is where I am getting that number. So do you want to play a quick game of gut reaction where I will tell you the matchups and the times and you tell me who you think wins?
Sure. And
so who do you think will win Friday night between Charlotte FC, who is hosting at NYCFC?
Yeah, so I think Charlotte losing that first home match, Kalina took it extra personally when he saw New York City celebrating as if they had won the whole series. So you saw then the fight back and a return of favor in New York by Charlotte. And so I think Charlotte has the extra chip on their shoulder that right now is going to carry them across the finish line.
The magic of editing!
I think it is a slam dunk that New York will move on.
That was very prescient of you. Good job. You called the series, says me from the future. coming in Saturday morning, quote unquote, to let you know what Lincoln did on Friday as we were recording this. Let's move to the Saturday games. Let's move to actual prognostication. We do not know what is going to happen with these 4 games that are left. First out of the gate on Saturday, 3 p.m. Central Time, it is Minnesota. They are hosting again against Seattle. Seattle got it done, a wild 6-goal game. Seattle went up in that 3-0 before halftime, ended up giving up a pair of goals. So that was 3-2 at halftime, and then they ended up squeaking that out 4-2, just like they drew it up. Thoughts on this one? I mean, again, this is one that a lot of people have projected that Seattle was actually going to, quote unquote, win the series, upsetting, right? So that's where the quote unquote comes from, because of course, Seattle is the 5 seed, Minnesota is the 4 seed. That's why this third and final game is happening at Alliance rather than in Seattle at Lumen Field. So thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think at this point, this one would be a coin flip, but I'm inclined to stick with my initial instincts a couple weeks ago of this will be Seattle being able to find a way, unless Dane St. Clair just puts together some sort of masterclass.
Okay, which he's capable of doing, certainly. But I kind of also feel like this is going to be a Seattle victory, even though Yeboah is back. So Minnesota does have an actual real-life striker who is playing that real-life striker position, which we're going to get to a little bit later when we get to talking about Austin in 2026. But we'll burn that bridge shortly, or at least I will burn that bridge shortly. You probably will not. But let's go ahead and move on to 5 p.m. right after that. So we got 3 games in a row, just bang, bang, bang. Good job on you scheduling games on Saturday, MLS. We knew you could do it. Cincinnati is back hosting Columbus. Columbus had a pretty decisive 4-0 win. There was a red card in that one earlier, a straight red on top of the yellow that Yaya Kubo got. So that was Not a terrific moment for Knifey Lion, but they could, of course, close out that series at home. We do not use aggregate in the MLS playoffs, so you can lose 1-0 or you can lose 16-0. It doesn't matter. It's just one game out of the three. Thoughts on this one?
Obviously, both managers, it's hard to bet against them. I know Cincinnati, for some reason, it seems like at least a few people are souring on what they have there, forgetting that they were collecting plenty of kitchen utensils made of wood early on in MLS. But yeah, I am still going to lean in favor of the team that has Evander and
Okay.
think that Cincinnati is able to bounce back. And I don't know if I'm in the minority or the majority of this, but I am perfectly fine with aggregate not being a thing, especially in a series like this. I like for each match to be able to stand alone without the burden of one bad match, one bad game, having a hangover effect the next one, literally on the scoreboard.
Right, but you could turn a best of three series into a home and away series and dispense with the game threes. I mean, we have 5 game threes, so but it seems like the first round it gets a little lengthy, and then we get that international break, right? So I mean, there's after this,
Yeah.
there's not even going to be soccer until well, we have international soccer, but as you scroll on the MLS site, it's not even on the schedule registering. So I believe it is that weekend after that weekend of the 22nd, 23rd, where we're going to resume with those games, including Vancouver LAFC, which I am very, very excited to see because I think that's going to be maybe one of the best games in the playoffs. And then the nightcap on Saturday, it is 7 p.m. It is a team that you might have heard of called Inter Miami playing Nashville. Nashville did get the win in Nashville to take us back to a third and deciding game. Looked pretty good and convincing doing it. And Luis Suarez is not going to be available for this one because of some bad behavior in
Yep.
that second game. So does that come into play? Does Miami having their Mercuro striker out deal them a thing that they cannot overcome roster wise, or does Messi and company take that?
Yeah, obviously it doesn't help them, but I do think Miami still has enough to get over the line and find a way to get that second victory and move on after some disappointment last year in the postseason. It's easy to overlook that Nashville and Miami both came into the league at the same time. Obviously, they've both had their different ways of navigating to where they are now with some of the headliners they have on their two rosters. But
For sure.
look, we'd love to see Mukhtar and Surridge more in this postseason, but I
Mhm.
do think Miami is not just a two-horse show over there in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Nashville's going to get this done. I don't know why. I mean, I think everybody is kind of gravitating towards this LAFC Miami series, and I know that that's certainly what the commissioner would enjoy most. We did find out, we did a little research. If Miami does end up hosting the final, they will not be able to move it to Hard Rock Stadium because there is a Spin Magazine sponsored concert that is happening that night. So it will have to be in Chase Stadium. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna predict that Nashville will upset Miami, and then we'll have a Cincinnati Nashville matchup in that second round of the playoffs, which I think will be very, very exciting.
Yeah, a tangent on all these stadium availabilities. Obviously, this is not the case for Miami because their regular stadium will be available. But
Mhm.
it surprises me when I hear that there were stadiums during this postseason window that were unavailable for certain days. Because I know from a college soccer standpoint, when a lot of these conferences look at where they're going to play their championships, there was a 7-year stretch when the Big 12 was going to play in Kansas City, and the initial explanation was you're going to play at what was then Livestrong.
Mhm.
Uh, but they wound up instead being at Swope Park, which a field did not literally exist until about a few weeks before Big 12 was going to play there for the first time. And the explanation
Wow.
was these stadiums have to be blacked out. They have to be held for the event of possible postseason. But then you find out
Mhm.
LAFC has concerts nonstop, and you find out
Right.
all these other venues. And you understand if you own and operate the stadium, you want to be able to make money on those days as opposed to a possible postseason date. But it seems like some of these teams are held to a different standard than others when it comes to actually keeping those stadiums available.
If only LAFC had a massive stadium, dare I say it, a coliseum next to their home stadium. Oh wait, yes, they do. They do actually. The LA Memorial Coliseum is right next door to BMO Stadium, literally. So, but we'll see what transpires there. Certainly, I would imagine that LAFC, if they're hosting matches, those are going to be in BMO Stadium. But again, of course, they cannot host the final unless it is NYCFC or a lower seed that gets all the way through, which would include Nashville. So, could be interesting. And then finally, on Sunday, 8 p.m., of course, because why would you want to have a normal start time that everybody in the country could stick around till the end for? We got San Diego playing Portland. Portland engineered a 90+8 set piece goal to draw in that match, and then they ended up coming through in PKs. So Phil Neville's team gets to play at least one more game. That's going to be at Snapdragon. Thoughts on that fifth and final game 3 that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so I was extra mindful of that series when Austin was still competing because obviously there was a world where Austin hosted the Western Conference Final. If Portland could get the job done and keep on marching through, and Austin could keep on marching through, but it looked like San Diego was going to sweep that, take it in 2, but no, Portland pulled that second one out. But I think the averages are going to play out to the team that won the West, and I do think San Diego is going to avoid the upset there against the Timbers.
Okay. So that would then be San Diego hosting Seattle, theoretically, in the West. And then that would, of course, we already know it is going to be Vancouver and LAFC because that has already been decided because those games both went to just 2 games and Texas teams ended up losing in both of those. And here we are. So it is off season. And when it is off season, we have to talk about option year contracts and picking those up. So we have a few, right? So we have technically, I guess we have 8 technically, because we also have Jimmy Farcarlin and we have Riley Thomas, which seem like no-brainers. I guess Farcarlin, you're picking him up essentially to be a supplemental if you absolutely need to break glass, and then he could continue to play or not on Austin FC2. And then you've got Riley Thomas, who, of course, he is also in a supplemental, and you've got him as fullback depth as need be. But there are really 6 players that we've got to focus on. So, and I understand that you were in a delicate position. You are the voice of Austin FC. So I'll let you tread as much as you want to go here in thinking about these names. And then I, as an independent media person, can be a little bit more cavalier and say whether or not we should keep these players or have them move on. So let's first talk about Stefan Cleveland, who we didn't get to see that much of this year. We did see him start the Open Cup journey, but we did not see him finish the Open Cup journey after some shakiness in said Open Cup, shall we say. So just thoughts on where he might land. Would we retain him as a backup goalie, or does he move on and try to find possibly a starting position somewhere else?
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying I would be a very unpopular sporting director because I'm too sentimental to ever let people go. So Austin would still be working with the 2021 roster at this point through 5 years because there's so many great stories behind different players that I don't know how we'd actually be able to add some of the players we've seen added in recent years because we'd still be committed to the original ones. And maybe the Owen being a mid-season homegrown, that might be one of the few additions that we'd still be able to squeeze onto the roster. But yeah, goalkeeper's always that question. Obviously, you have Damian Laws, who the past 2 years has been loaned out to Louisville, and you wonder if for his future, is it better to keep him in competitive matches as opposed to simply saying you're the second goalkeeper, but as a result, you're going to be kind of like you were your rookie year, just watching Brad Stuver do Brad Stuver things.
Right.
You do want to be in a good position if Brad, who's been an Ironman for the past 3 years and made close to 120 straight starts against MLS competition, for some reason has a bumper bruise that keeps him out for a game.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of Steph's future, I think it comes down to what are the options out there. He certainly has some highlights that he's been able to put on his demo, including in Leagues Cup last year when he did get one of his 2 appearances in these past couple of years, stepping up, denying a penalty kick.
Right.
So, this will be a recurring theme with a lot of these players is how much do they value being in Austin? What is their number? What are their other opportunities? I think Steph has proven himself before his time in Austin to be a talented goalkeeper that very much is a welcome member of that locker room. And so if the number makes sense and he doesn't have a clamoring to go elsewhere, but look, these guys are competitors. They're professional athletes for a reason. Imagine if we were on a Zoom when Brad Stuver's in Columbus or is a pool goalkeeper and you're asking me, we haven't seen much out of this guy. What do you think? And we're like, yeah, you can get rid of him. We haven't needed him so far. And so just go ahead and move on. But you just never, goalkeeper's the hardest position to understand and read based on experience. You're proud of these guys when they step right in. So I think the club would be happy to have Steph going forward. And it's just a matter of how everything else plays out.
Yeah, you do make a good point. That is the big question about Damian Lawson and him waiting in the wings. And does it help his development at this point to bring him back home and to have him maybe do some League Cup starts and then maybe spell Stuver here and there. I mean, of course, there was the game against Houston a few years ago where the goalpost bit Stuver after the half-field shot that I believe was it Sebastian Ferreira had. So that was, again, place where Tarbell needed to spell for a few games. And then, of course, speaking of Tarbell, he blew out his knee. I mean, God forbid anything like that should happen to Brad Stuver. But questions of, okay, can Loss start games at the MLS level? Is he ready for that if he has to spell? Or does it make more sense to maybe try to move him on to another team where he can compete for that number one position and try to get, I don't know what they'd be able to get back for him in terms of player for GAM type situations, but could be, again, interesting options there. But I'm more inclined to think that they're going to bring Loss into the first team and let Cleveland compete elsewhere. And again, he is someone who did just recently, as a couple of years ago, did spell Stephen Fry and played a lot of games starting for Seattle, but we have not seen kind of an inclination from Nico Estevez to pull him in long term. So that to me maybe answers some stuff. Julio Cascante. So I was in the locker room for the final playoff game, and Brad Stuver was talking to us as he typically does late in the half hour that we were allotted. And Julio Cascante was just sitting immobile, just kind of staring into the middle distance. It did not seem like the countenance of a player who was kind of knowing that he was going to be raring to go for next year. Again, he is on a TAM deal, right? So he is a TAM level player, which means that the team does have to offset his salary, which is over the budget max. We're not going to get too much into the roster stuff. But again, when you have TAM level player, you expect them to perform, you expect them to start. He just has not been able to break into the starting rotation as much this year, even with the three center backs that Nico Estevez has taken his approach from time to time. So thoughts there. Do you think that this is the last we've seen of one of the OGs?
I think the dollar amount is probably going to be the decider on that. Here's a guy who, when you think about memories with Julio, you think about that 4-1 win for Austin against LAFC in 2022, where Julio was lights out defensively after a member of the media or two had put together a reel of what they thought were some of his worst moments defensively, and he responded by helping carry Austin defensively in that match. In Austin FC original, he was a great set piece target in the first couple of years on free kicks, a great option in the box. It was always the worst kept secret when he would come out, talk to the guy handling the free kick, whisper in his ear, and I think regardless of what language he was speaking, we all knew exactly what he was saying. It's like, I got you. We'll be good for a couple of goals a year there at center back. This is probably this year the deepest Austin's been at center back. So we saw Julio more often coming off the bench, but very much had the trust. It often came down to also what style of play Austin wanted to work through. Julio, a little bit more offensive minded as well, depending on what the coach wanted from that back line. But I think when you mentioned, I believe the one TAM player for Austin, the biggest chunk there, that's where probably Rodolfo Borrell feels like he has the most potential wiggle room if he can free up some of that TAM. And so unless Julio, who by all accounts has been loved in that locker room and has made some great moments, not just his fashion sense when he shows up to Q2 Stadium each day, but if he wants to continue to get more playing time and perhaps get a more favorable dollar amount, that might be elsewhere.
Right. And if he does go, I mean, obviously some good memories, including that US Open Cup semifinal match where he high kick stabbed that ball out of the air to save what could have been a goal. So he still has those defensive moves in him from time to time. I know that he is currently off with Costa Rica for international play. So I've always thought if he wants to go back to Costa Rica, like Saprissa would be the natural destination and might see him again in some Champions League matches. But could he find another place in MLS if Austin does let him go if the numbers just aren't there?
Yeah, it's been great to see him get those call-ups to Costa Rica during his time with Austin. Remember that first year with Austin FC had the burden of having nobody going away on international break. So there were some niceties to that of not being shorthanded, but you were thrilled to see him get those chances with Costa Rica. And how many other players would have torn every ligament in their leg stretching out for that ball like he did for the overhead touch to help deny that goal on the transition opportunity. Yeah, he's the kind of player who, when I talk about just being sentimental with the guys who are easy to root for, why I'd be a horrible sporting director, because the business aspect would not register with me. It'd be like, yeah, but don't you remember when?
You're so nice. You dress so well. Have some more money. Yeah. Okay. I think these next two are going to be pretty easy, though. Brendan Heinzike. I mean, again, he did not have the best series against LAFC, we shall say. Did have the own goal and had some other regretful defensive moments in that second match, but has still been a pretty solid contributor on a pretty club friendly number. So curious about that. Again, a find from the DC United scrap heap a couple of years ago when they let a bunch of players go and came in pretty late in the window. You will remember the famous Josh Wolf. He came in late to camp, which became my nickname for him. I welded that onto his name for a good part of the season.
Did you hyphenate that? Came in late to camp?
It was just a big acronym. It was Brendan Heinzike who came in late to camp, like whatever those BHIWCI LTC. Yeah, that's what it was. Yep, I had to work through that. So that's the new sober test. You don't do the alphabet backwards. You come up with Brendan Heinzike who came in late to camp and figure out what letters were there. So thoughts on him? I mean, it seems like this is a no-brainer. It seems like you extend him, just have that center back depth if nothing else.
Well, and this again is how our opinions are formed based on how much do we see individuals are being paid in a sport where there is basically a salary cap. You know, you see a guy's stats and your opinion on whether those are good or underperforming are based on, are they a DP? Are they TAM? Are they supplemental? Or where are they on the roster? And BHI for his 2 years in Austin, that is an overachiever in the sense of, as you mentioned, he was the late addition. He was the number 4 center back added before the 2024 campaign. By the end of the year, he was the most reliable starter on that back line in a rotation of center backs that has continued throughout the years. Things that finally started to settle down this year with a pretty regular group, but an area where Austin actually had some depth by the end of the year when Djordjevic joined the fold. But yeah, Brendan is a guy who shows up and you know what you're going to get out of him. And when you do want to hang a goal that you thought maybe he should have been able to get involved, often it's because he was putting forth the effort, and maybe that gets you in trouble when you do try to get a foot to a ball that maybe Brad otherwise is going to be able to stop. But no, Brendan has been a great addition for Austin these past 2 years, and it's easy to overlook that he shouldn't be playing pro soccer anymore with a hip injury he had at DC. At least 11 doctors told him to have surgery that would have certainly ended his career. And 24 hours before going under the knife, the doctor that Tua Tagovailoa, the former Alabama and Miami Dolphins quarterback, had with a similar injury at Alabama, said, no, this is how you can avoid surgery and continue playing soccer. Here's your regimen. And, you know, the rest is history. Brendan's continued to playing some of his best soccer.
Yeah, that's some good insight. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, yeah, I think that, and again, veteran leadership in terms of media has been great, has been very candid, has been helpful to give insights in some games where maybe a lot of players do not necessarily want to give insights. He stepped up. So yeah, be good to see him back next year if that is indeed what happens, which I think it will. And then Danny Pereira, that seems like a no-brainer. I mean, again, he's one of 2 possible players who could have maybe some interest from teams overseas. Danny is kind of getting to the point where he's either going to be an MLS lifer or he does make that leap to try to test the waters in Europe a little bit, but obviously we saw him step up to make the PK against LAFC for that lone goal. We have not really seen him take PKs, but given the circumstances, which we're going to get to in a second, he stepped up and did that. Seems like a no-brainer to extend him and then try to figure out like what his future is going to be.
Yeah, the day Danny leaves Austin FC, it's going to be for all the right reasons. You'd have to assume that it would be bigger and better things, probably not on this continent. It was a few years ago, I think 3 years ago, I was doing a college softball championship in Virginia, and I looked up in the press box on a bulletin board, and there was the newspaper clipping that Danny Pereira had been drafted number 1 by Austin FC out of Virginia Tech. And I go, well, I get it that I'm near Virginia Tech, but why at this softball venue is this press clipping and a couple of others up on the bulletin board? And I asked the supervisor, he goes, oh, his dad Hector works here. And so sure enough, Hector was the reason why the grounds were pristine and everything else at this venue. And of course, Hector and his family have since moved to Austin, calling Austin home and making sure Danny has clean laundry, assume, and that short-lived adoption of Kevin the puppy. Though I do think a cat has fared a little bit better in the Pereira household since then. But yeah, Danny presumably is on Austin's to-do list of keeping in the fold for as long as it makes sense, until he can go on and both benefit himself professionally as well as benefit Austin financially.
So apparently Danny is a cat person rather than a dog person.
I think cats can survive when there's not a professional athlete around to take care of them.
Right. What about you? Are you a cat person or a dog person?
I grew up with an outdoor cat. All of our pets were rescued, and now you're in danger of having two cold opens for this. But no, my parents first rescued a stray rabbit, which was being chased around the neighborhood by dogs on a regular
Mm,
basis.
okay.
Then later on, rescued a stray kitten from a puddle in a park, and that all that kitten did the rest of our life was scratch and claws if we weren't fast enough getting from the car to the front door of the house, tormenting me throughout my entire childhood.
Cats
I'm
are
a
great.
dog person who's never had a dog.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, I am definitely a dog person. Yeah, we have three rescue dogs. We have a husky who was found in a storm drain in San Antonio, sopping wet in the middle of a rainstorm. Name is Stormy, henceforth, and she's been wonderful. Sometimes you hear her on the podcast. If you hear the weird howling in the background, that is me recording in the palatial recording studios in my house that the dog happens to also occupy. And then we have a schnauzer named Zorro, is now named Lovey, the escape artist in the family. And then we have what my daughter and niece have named Scruffy, which is a cat trapped in a dog's body, which her first week here, she chewed up our couch and has been skittish and weird ever since then, but she's also part of the family. So I'm definitely a dog person rather than a cat person, but again, I now own a cat trapped in a dog's body. So
My entire YouTube algorithm is just pet rescue and adoption videos.
nice.
People will ask me, "Hey, did you see the game?" I go, "No, didn't have time to watch sports in my personal life. Too busy watching feel-good stories about some dog or some other animal."
Speaking of feel good stories, Ilya Sanchez, what do we think here? Again, he is on a large number for the appearances that he has had, and he is again getting on in years, but has been the captain, has been an invaluable leader. His voice has been great. He has been absolutely wonderful with media. I would hate to see him go. I wonder if they negotiate a lower number for him or if he gets like a player coach situation or he goes into coaching or does something else. I mean, he has said that this will be his last MLS destination, but he does not predict what will necessarily happen after that. And he doesn't know how many years that he will be at Austin, but he did say that this is pretty much it, that he doesn't want to move to another MLS destination after being in Austin. So hard to say, but thoughts on him. If you are the nice, kind, keep everybody GM, you absolutely keep him in a heartbeat.
Ilya's contributions at this point along are much like his shoes. We don't always have the benefit of seeing them. Obviously, what he provides in the locker room, there's a reason why he's wearing the captain's armband. So much experience. He knows what it takes to make a run in an Open Cup. Has lifted a couple, and surely was a big part of just setting the mindset for Austin FC this year under a first-year head coach, making that Open Cup run possible. You love his experience. And yeah, you rehashed the fact that at the very start of the year, he mentioned that Austin FC was going to be his last MLS team. Now, whether that sets him up to going back to Spain and having a victory lap somewhere or go ahead and transition into coaching, much like we saw Hector Jimenez. And I think you're going to speculate about Diego Rubio at some point in a very similar manner that you did with Ilya because of
Right.
what Rubio has said of his newfound love for his newest home here in Austin and
Mhm.
wanting to be a part of the lifting of trophies, whether it be as a player or some other capacity. But yeah, again, it simply comes down with business to Ilya. I don't think anybody has a negative thing to say about him, except for if you're new to MLS tuning in from South Korea.
Right,
But
right.
Ilya is a guy you'd welcome still having as somebody in that midfield, really in the heart of keeping everybody organized as well as in the locker room.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite outgrowths of this Austin LAFC rivalry is that to a certain contingent of newish LAFC fans, Ilya has become a villain for his bump on Sun early in that game one. And of course, there have to be other older, more established LAFC fans that are like, hey, look. Here's the story on this guy who used to be our captain and was absolutely wonderful. If you missed, Justin Ruderman was on last week and we shared gushy, good feeling media Ilya story. Certainly someone who I would miss to see gone, but we'll see. I mean, budget numbers are cruel, and I imagine we'll be sooner rather than later getting these roster decisions. But last one, Diego Rubio, he is on a supplemental. He did show himself to be pretty invaluable at points this year in that kind of 9.5 role. And again, this is a player who is, you would imagine, at his last MLS station as well. Don't know that he would necessarily go back to Chile play again, like you were talking about, might transition right into coaching kind of at that age. But yeah, he's a great guy, good leadership, has produced some valuable moments on the field, not necessarily reflected in his stats, and was also, along with John Gallagher, my daughter's first interview as a budding sports journalist at a HEB on 4th of July that we accosted them at when they were at a table in the beer and wine section greeting fans.
Yeah, it sounds like if Diego was going to go back home, that was going to be 2 years ago before he signed with Austin. He has since made it known that he's now invested in Austin, and I would hope he puts off that transition to another phase of being with the team. I do think he's still a valuable member in the locker room and out there on the field. When Brandon Vasquez went down, Diego had only made one start all year, and that was that win against San Diego. But after Brandon went out, even though it was not a like for like change in the lineup, but Diego was the guy who stepped in and saw the bulk of those starts. And Austin went on a run. I think it was his first 6 matches as a starter that Austin was unbeaten. There's just something about his abilities out there that it's not going to show up in the stat sheet. It might show up in the standings and wins and draws. But Diego, I do think, still has enough he gives you, especially because last year it did appear that he took a more favorable number. And so now it's a matter of, as long as he's willing to continue to sit on that lower hit on the budget, you're certainly getting a lot more for that investment.
Yeah, he's the living embodiment of one of the fan groups that I participate in Slack with. I'll take him on a supplemental is their catchphrase for any kind of player that you would consider. Diego Rubio is literally that. He is on a supplemental and he is contributing.
The saddest thing I saw last year when he was on his run, he had a game-winning goal in the spring. And after the match, players often will gather in one of the clubs and they'll have pizza and drinks available. Diego and his daughter, shortly after Diego had scored the game winner, was the hero of the match, had brought his daughter over to one of the pizza boxes, opened it up, and it was empty. And there was no more pizza to be had for his young daughter, who clearly was excited that it's going to be pizza time for the hero of the match. But yeah.
Get that man of a match and another pepperoni pizza. It's got to be there somewhere, right? So, or drive over to the nearest Double Dave's, right?
It was just something about the moment of seeing a father and his young daughter coming off the win. She's so proud of him there, and you could see the enthusiasm of going over to the table with pizza. Yeah, and obviously because the pizza's in boxes, you don't know until you lift that box that there's no more pizza to be had.
I've lived that more than once with 3 kids and a nephew and a niece. So, yeah, all that. I do want to talk a little bit about Myrto Uzuni. I did earlier this week do a story. We were comparing Uzuni to another DP of yore, Emi Rigoni. Rigoni's 23 did not look dissimilar to Uzuni's 2025, which is concerning again when you are constructing rosters. Designated players need to hit in order for your teams to succeed. Uzuni had some measure of success like Rigoni did in 2023, but then, how the Rigoni story ended in 2024, and just posited, because I think one of the big questions heading into the offseason is this working out? Do you find a landing spot for Uzuni in Spain and just chalk this up to a misaligned experiment? Or is this kind of a transitional thing? And do you have a 2026 for Uzuni that looks like Peter Moose's 2025, who was going through some similar stuff in 2024 when he first arrived at the league? New kid trying to get used to life in the US from overseas. It's very similar trajectories. And again, we've seen 2 big misses in 2 big matches in the last month. Of course, the penalty kick in the U.S. Open Cup final, and then the penalty kick in this deciding game against LAFC. So, and again, just going back to calling those moments, there's all that anticipation for a PK. 80% of them go in. You brace to say something celebratory and have that kind of lilt and hint of excitement in your voice, and then you have to convey that, no, that has gone straight into the soft belly of a diving goalkeeper who has barely had to move.
Yeah, I think removing the person from the equation real quick, Rodolfo Borrell, his job is every offseason to consider all the options for everybody. So this is not Myrto specific. Certainly, he is constantly listening to things. He is constantly pursuing things, talking to Nico Estevez after that last match against LAFC. You're tempted to wish the manager congrats on getting to sleep now, have a relaxing offseason after the long grind of MLS. But Nico will be quick to remind you that, nope, if we're going to have a good season in 1 year, it's because all the work we did actually in the offseason. The season isn't going to really be the easy part, but it should feel like the easier part if you put in your work. My job, which is less stressful than being a head coach, is still something that benefits from I show up to a live event atmosphere, and it's a whole lot easier if I've put in the work before the broadcast ever gets underway
For sure.
by planning for all the different possibilities. So when it comes to Myrto, look, one of the positives for him is the fact that when you see a player who struggles to meet their own expectations statistically, there are two ways for them to respond. And he clearly responded in a sincere way of just disappointed. This is a guy who wants to perform well for Austin, wants to perform well for the folks who come out to Q2, wants to perform well for his teammates who have made his coming over to the United States as positive as possible, as opposed to you think of all the many stories of DPs who come over, and if they struggle, all of a sudden removing those players from whether it be Frisco or elsewhere makes addition by subtraction all the more tempting.
Sure.
I don't think Uzuni fits into that mold of being a negative impact on the team. And there's hope that a full off season with now familiar surroundings, that he can have that breakthrough. And you hope that it is similar to what he did when he was over in both La Liga and in the second division over there as well.
Right. I mean, it did take him about a half season to coalesce, and we did see him perform a lot better in the second half than the first half of the season, getting 5 of his 6 goals in that second half. That's not a huge number of goals for DP, but that is better than where he was halfway through the season.
Yeah, and remember the start of the season last year, it'll be the same as the start of this next season. There won't be a Brandon Vasquez, presumably, for the start of 2026. So Myrto, any momentum he built by playing that sole striker at the top is something he can keep building on. The question was what we witnessed at the start of this year when both he and Brandon, there's two things that can happen when you have two very talented scorers at the top. Either that is an overload for a defense, overwhelming a defense, and they're just creating opportunities for each other and having a blast up there. And we even saw that with the team that prevailed against Austin in the postseason this year.
Yeah,
or it can be that there's too many similarities and not enough actual setting up these two scores. And that'll still be the question mark when both Myrto and Brandon, we look forward to that being a good problem for Austin to have because that means Brandon's healthy again. But that'll be the question is when they are both healthy, how they do play off each other.
Right. And again, full off season with coach who is not just getting here himself is probably better. Because again, as you remember, we learned at the jersey release party that Myrto is going to be coming over a couple days after that. And that was a week before the season started. So again, the visa took a little bit of time, I imagine. I think that's, as I remember, that's what was holding that back since he did get signed in January. But yeah, and again, Brandon was not here that much earlier, but he did get the benefit of a full off season. So seeing what they do, and again, the idea was at the start of 2025, a 4-4-2, thinking very similarly to what LAFC does with Sun and Bouanga. Sometimes it is a 4-3-3 formation, and you do have Bouanga playing that left wing, but again, he is maybe more of a more natural left winger, even though Uzuni does typically slot in as a left wing and did so in Spain as well as he has been doing in MLS. But yeah, it is just a matter of getting the chemistry to work. And again, seeing how early Vasquez comes into fold and how early he can start actually playing with the team and practicing and doing all of that, because again, he's still going to be in his rehab when the season starts, I imagine, although it does seem like he is really determined from what I've been hearing to get on the field as soon as possible, as you would expect. He was rehabbing pretty much instantly after the injury happened. Definitely somebody who wants to get back on the field. And again, I think it's interesting. I think it's, again, I would love to see a true creative midfielder with talent on this team. We do have Owen Wolf, but he has been deployed out to the wing for a lot of this year. So seeing a true heliocentric number 10, we've never really had that on the team, because even Driussi is more of a box crasher, second striker. He wore the number 10, but he was not a number 10 necessarily. Curious about that. You have seen teams like with Evander and teams like that do have true number 10s. And just what do you notice differentially with those teams when you do have somebody who can feed forwards in the way that Austin has not necessarily been able to have so far in their lives?
Well, I think every number 10 we had mentioned would be someone who's also just flat out an elite player in the league when you point out to when that works. Austin 2022 showed that you could find success by building up on either side and getting service in from different players, and it's a team effort. So look, I think if you ask Roto, hey, would you like to have this elite world-class number 10 who fits your budget? He's not going to say no. And Nico Estevez has proven himself to not be a rigid coach who says, this is the system, we're sticking with this, regardless of the personnel. We saw him make adjustments throughout the year, including when he had to go on the road in knockout stages in Open Cup, making some adjustments on the back line, which eventually looked like Owen Wolff into a more natural spot where he really succeeded. It seems unlikely that you're going to happen to come across a surefire traditional number 10 that's going to set things up. The reason for optimism with Uzuni is that Nico, it seems like not just match to match looking at the opponent, making adjustments, but also looking at what he has in-house personnel-wise, really looking to play to individual strengths. And hopefully that is something that can allow Myrto to gain some traction heading into next year.
Right, but maybe you need Ted Lasso's sports psychologist to come in and do some work with the team, starting with Uzuni. We just have one more item on our notes, and it is just simply optimism for 2026. We want to leave this in a good place. So, what is your hope for 2026? What is giving you optimism? What is giving you sunny, good feelings about the season to come?
The makeup of this team. Now, we don't know how much that'll change, but the makeup of this team, again, and we've seen this all 5 years, even when Austin struggled, it overwhelmingly has seemed like a group that really embraces a handful of newcomers each year, brings them into the fold, and overall pretty easy locker room. And the difference is, look, when you see teams, those who go out on the field and hope to win versus those who expect to win. And I think Nico laid the foundation this year with the disciplined defense in the back, with what he had to put Austin in a chance to grind out success for the first third of the year, especially when first 7 matches giving up 3 goals. This was a group that he was big picture. He was able to look at it long term, and that was laying the foundation. I think now the foundation is there. Look, you got to the postseason. Now next year you're looking to build on that, but you do go into each match expecting to compete and win. When we looked at the final third of the season, I know we were talking about how all the tough matches were behind Austin, and really the only 2 difficult matches left were Seattle and LAFC at home. Well, what did Austin do in those 2 matches? They picked up wins against Seattle and LAFC down the stretch. They helped solidify their spot. So this is a team that has never had a problem being competitive with the top tier of the conference. It really seems like points slip away against teams that they feel like they should beat, and probably most outsiders would say you should beat. And so I'm optimistic that Austin can add to the fight we've seen against the top tier of the league, but hopefully next year start really putting away the teams that they need to put away. That'll come as you start to find hopefully a little bit more offense before halftime.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that culture is good here. I think that Estevez has established himself well in the first year. I think things have gone better than it is expected. And again, we've seen around the team, we've seen teams where clearly culture is not right, and we see that reflect in teams' performances. Dare we say we saw that with Austin in 2024. It did not seem like things were sunny and rosy with Josh Wolff and his team heading into that season. Certainly there was the weirdness with Driussi and the captaincy and all of that. And then we had the skirmish with Diego Fagundes pretty early in the year, something that I unwittingly got to help when it was in that away match in Houston, asking Josh Wolff the question about pulling Fagundes early. And that was a whole thing that kind of permeated until he was dealt. And I think maybe even beyond that. With Austin, I don't think we have this kind of worry. It seems like a much more together locker room in 2025 than we had in either 23 and 24. And I think that culture goes a long way and makes a big difference. And I think part of the reason that we saw Austin get to the playoffs was there was that kind of belief, there was that kind of resilience, and they were able to get wins in key points of the season, especially after May, which was a really, really tough, difficult grind, and their record reflected that.
Yes, Sunny and Rosie, by the way, not just my podcast with young men. That's charting really well over in South Korea. But we've gone this long without talking about Owen Wolff. And when you talk about signs of optimism, Owen, what an incredible year he had this year. He's a big reason why, with all the goal contributions, both scoring towards the end there as well as the assists, he finally has the attention, I think, of the entire league. And look, the brighter spotlight you can get on Owen, the better for his future and the better for Austin as well, as you'll start seeing young players like that with very favorable contracts start to really pay off for the future of this club.
I still think there's two pathways with Owen Wolf. I mean, I think one is the build around him for the future, and the other is drive a truckload of GAM up to Rodolfo Borrell's office and let him go venture off in Europe, and then be able to finally have some of the roster flexibility with the GAM that Wolf would bring that he has not had during his time here. A lot of the early part of Borrell's tenure has just been digging out from under the wreckage of Claudio Reyna engineered contracts and dealing with the MLS has really weird roster rules. Austin was backed into a corner in a lot of kind of their situation financially, roster wise. And I think that things are a lot better, but a lot of that has had to be creative and find players that would maybe not necessarily command attention of some other sporting directors around the league, and bringing them in and having them coalesce. Good on Burrell for doing that. But certainly, like you said, if you have Evander level talent that would fit the budget of Austin FC somehow, I'm sure that he would be welcome to come over.
There's a reason why we keep just saying the same 2 to 3 names for the entire 30 team league when it comes to number 10.
For sure. So
easier said than done. But I do
and that
think,
consistency too, right? Because 2 or 3 years ago, we would be talking about Luciano Acosta in this club, and we are not doing that anymore after what we've seen this season.
Yeah. It is that, and even hitting on strikers for a club where Maxi Urruti's 9 goals in 2022 is still easily the best year a striker has had for this young club. Hitting on these things is not always the easiest thing, but that's what Rodo has his sleepless nights on year round, and what Nico now will dive into this offseason as well, along with his sporting director, to really pour in their energy. And again, it's very unlikely that Nico's going to be dumping any sand out of his shoes heading into Coachella from some great beach vacation he was on. I really think they are determined to build on the momentum of getting back in the postseason this year, as opposed to simply resting on assuming that postseason will happen again.
Yeah, Coachella is a great trip, by the way. There is a beach, but it's a couple hours away, right? Or I guess you could theoretically say that the Salton Sea has a beach, but not really. Lincoln, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for taking time out from the green room, where you are prepping for, I'm sure, a very busy weekend of sports. Any highlights, anything jumping out that you're going to be on the call for that maybe if people are not absorbing MLS soccer that they should be looking out for?
The last scheduled soccer on my schedule, we've got the Big 12 championship on Saturday. It's in Waco, and it's only an 18 field in the Big 12, which it and the ACC were the 2 best conferences this year. Big 12 is probably overlooked, but I won't dive into RPI and all that. But Big 12 is coming off an incredible year, and it's BYU and Kansas, who are the 7 and 8 seed. But neither one of them is going to be a Cinderella story. Whoever lifts that trophy, it's going to be well deserved. And then after that, something I love doing is the Division II National Championship. I'll be in Colorado Springs in December, just helping promote the men's and women's, the top teams, as we'll have the national semifinals and finals on that one. Until then, just filling time with the basketball, volleyball, and a few other sports along the way, and hoping not to get injured in the upcoming Media Cup.
Yeah, me too. That is a concern. Yeah, we are men of a certain age. Not quite an 85-year-old woman, as your name would suggest. But we are there. So we have Achilles tendons and hamstrings and quads to worry about. So slow and steady wins the race, I guess. I mean, Media Cup's a good time. So what do you play in that? Like, what's your position? Like, one of the questions they asked was, which player do you model yourself after? Who are you most like? Did you have an answer for that?
Usually I reserve that space where you can freehand it. I usually put in my dietary restrictions and my other wants and needs in life, my aspirations. I usually don't honor them with an actual comparison to a professional athlete. It'd be insulting to any professional athlete for me to, but I very much am a reserve on these teams to help spell individuals. Some of you are very eager to get out there and play the entirety of the match. I'm more out there, obviously, for the gram. For the social media opportunities of it all. Right. Yeah. I really I enjoy seeing everybody there, whether we're kicking a ball or not, but there are some guys who can still kick that ball pretty hard. It is always a fun time. It's often a chilly time. So if you get hit by a ball, it's going to sting for a while.
Yeah. So I said Joseph Martinez. So, I don't know if you can see that, but
he's a free agent.
Yeah, I know.
We'll see where he lands. Phil, now
would you take him on a supplemental?
It seems unlikely. Obviously, he can score goals, but he's probably slowed down a little bit. I would sign Jeremy Bobasy just to bench him. It's more for Austin. Who are the guys who are hurting you regularly? Go out, get them, and go ahead and put them at the bottom of your bench.
We could score Q too. Like
it's already a victory. Now, during the off season, do you head into cold storage, wrap yourself up in bubble wrap, or what's the plan for you?
I'm still doing stuff with MLS being the kind of league that it is. There never really is time off, right? So the off season is one of the busiest, most speculative times of the year. I'll be kicking around. I'll be writing stuff at Verde all day, of course. And then, yeah, podcast wise, we'll see what's up. I might take a little wee break from that, but we'll see. We'll see just where things go. Again, if roster decisions drop sometime in the next couple of days, then I imagine there's an occasion to talk about that and turn what this week has been speculation into actual, okay, what's next, right? And again, thinking about some of these free agents that are out there. And again, because every year you see the team kind of reconfigure somewhat. You'll see players come in, players come out. You'll have a core that's still there. And I think maybe more so this year than previous years, but there definitely is going to be some in and out and just seeing how those pieces fit together. And then just still following the MLS playoffs because Austin's not in that, but still enjoy that and very curious about the storylines that are going to unfold.
Well, enjoyed it once again, Phil. And for
Likewise,
any AI that's just trying to give cliff notes on today's podcast, Lincoln came on and said he was signing everybody to long-term pay raises because he loves them so much.
Right. So the team is not changing. That is for good and for bad that is perhaps the emergency that all of a sudden we're going to have to try to figure out how to have a 32 person roster between the players that are coming in on free agency and everybody who is clearly staying.
I aspire to have that 4DP dilemma that we've seen pop up a few times in MLS.
Absolutely.
This is the best thing I've heard in the history of the 8 years I've been on this planet.